scheduled. Order, please. Before we begin the day routine, the subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley. Therefore, be resolved this government finally live up to its campaign promise and institute self-managed attendant care for Nova Scotians with disabilities. Be debated this evening at 6 p.m. Begin the day routine, presenting reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices the motion. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that at a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today, May 4th, is World Asthma Day, a day for us to recognize that asthma leaves 25% of Nova Scotia's children and 11% of Nova Scotia's adults struggling to breathe. And whereas asthma is the #1 cause of medical emergency in children and for school absences due to illness, and whereas the Lung Association of Nova Scotia is working with health professionals in Nova Scotia to educate those with asthma and to help individuals become actively involved in their own treatment, therefore be it resolved, all members of the House recognize May 4th as World Asthma Day and acknowledge the good work done by the Lung Association of Nova Scotia in helping people to manage the disease. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Environment and Labour, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May 2nd to 8th, 2004 is Composting Awareness Week, a time to recognize Nova Scotians who are committed to helping their environment through composting and are willing to share the benefits with those in need. And whereas the Plant a Row, Grow a Row program encourages gardeners to grow an extra row of vegetables or donate excess fruit and vegetables to their local food bank and soup kitchens. And whereas Nova Scotia Environment and Labour has partnered with the Composting Council of Canada, the Metro Food Bank, the Halifax Seed Company and the Resource Recovery Fund Board, and many other community-minded groups and organizations to sponsor the Plant a Row, Grow a Row program throughout Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved, this House recognize the contributions of the Composting Council of Canada to the success of the Plant a Row, Grow a Row program and applaud the hard work of all Nova Scotians who donate their time and energy to end hunger in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Mr. Waivers, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Taste of Nova Scotia Society Awards were introduced in 1999 to encourage the pursuit of excellence within the Taste of Nova Scotia membership and to recognize commitment within the culinary profession. And whereas the Taste of Nova Scotia Society honored the 2003 Taste of Nova Scotia Society Awards recipients on Wednesday, April 28, 2004, at the Prince George Hotel in Halifax. And whereas the 2003 Taste of Nova Scotia Restaurant of the Year Award was presented to Salties in Halifax, the 2003 Special Merit Award was presented to Donnie Campbell at Glenora Inn and Distillery in Glenville. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House recognize the recipients of this year's awards and all members of the Taste of Society Nova Scotia Society. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Mr. Waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 98% of fires in Nova Scotia are started by humans, with many of the fires occurring in spring and early summer when outdoor activities increase. And whereas spring fire season is now here and the possibility of warmer and drier conditions prevailing, property owners should take steps to ensure any potential fire hazards such as downed trees or dried brush within 10 to 30 meters of their structures are removed or appropriately spaced. And whereas property owners are responsible for reducing fire hazards on their properties, or they may be liable for the damages occurred and if a fire originated on their property, therefore be it resolved that members of the House review the attached brochure entitled How to Protect Your Home and Property from Wildfire, and that they encourage their constituents to obtain a copy of the brochure at the Department of Natural Resources offices and take steps to reduce potential fire hazards on their properties this fire season. Mr. Speaker, and I have copies of the brochure for all members, and I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture, and Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Government of Nova Scotia is committed to preserving and presenting the Gaelic language and culture for the benefit of all Nova Scotians and visitors. Whereas the Department of Tourism, Culture and Heritage continues to foster new links between the shared Gaelic cultures of Nova Scotia and the Highland Council of Scotland. Whereas a recent study states that Gaelic activities in Nova Scotia generate more than $23 million annually in direct revenues. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the importance of preserving the Gaelic culture in this province as we mark Gaelic Awareness Month during the month of May. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the students of Sir Charles Tupper Elementary School in Halifax, led by Principal Rice, are not only taught the traditional 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also focus on one more R, respect. And whereas one of the elementary school's program assistants, Irene Wilkinson, created an inventive way of teaching students the importance of showing respect towards others through a program she developed called Leaves of Respect. And whereas the school's tree, painted by art teacher Marika Simons, is already laden with many leaves with the names of students who, as noted by their teacher, have shown thoughtful acts, good deeds, and positive actions towards others. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House commend the inventiveness and creativity of Miss Wilkinson, who is helping to teach some of life's most important lessons to our young students through a very simple but highly effective method. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas last week, Nancy Clark, a Public Health Services Coordinator and board member of the Pictou County Health Authority, was honored by the International Nursing Society Sigma Theta Tau for her almost perfect grade point average in Dalhousie University's Master of Nursing program. And whereas Ms. Clark's story is remarkable, as she worked through a rare form of deadly cancer and a great deal of adversity to receive her Bachelor of Science in Nursing at St. FX University, and she continues to further her education and career while helping others. And whereas Ms. Clark credits her survival to her faith, her children, and her ability to make a difference in community health care, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House recognize Ms. Clark's commitment to shedding light on a rare form of cancer while giving hope to those battling the disease and contributing to her community as a healthcare professional and DHA board member. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. Notice the motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the federal government has finally announced the construction of 3 badly needed supply vessels for the Canadian Navy, but will not commit to building these vessels in Canada by changing its procurement policy that says it should only buy Canadian ships if there is a competitive environment. And whereas the shipbuilding and maintenance jobs that come with the manufacture of these vessels are desperately needed in an industry that continues to suffer from a lack of support from the federal government.
Hear, hear.
And whereas yesterday, Sackville-Musquodoboit Valley Eastern Shore MP Peter Stauffer joined with business and labor leaders in Ottawa to call on the government to change its policy and to have the supply vessels built in Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that this House urge the federal government to support our shipyard workers by changing its policy and ensuring that the 3 new supply vessels will be built and maintained right here in Canada. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sacred Heart School of Halifax held elections for student council on April 23rd, and whereas the school elected Carolyn Whalen and as head girl and Amanda Harwood as vice head girl for 2004-2005, and whereas Sophie McIntyre and Emily Rowe were elected as treasurer and secretary respectively, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate the incoming student council and wish them well in their role of representing the long history of excellence at Sacred Heart School. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give a notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Canada's Outstanding Young Farmers is a program founded by the Canadian Junior Chamber, which recognizes couples for their farming efforts, as well as their contributions to community, province, and country. And whereas Port Williams residents Brian and Edna Newcomb have been selected as finalists for the 2003 award, and whereas the Newcomb family operates Cornwallis Farms Limited, which has dairy, poultry, and crops, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Brian and Edna Newcomb on their selection as finalists for the Canada's Outstanding Young Farmers Award, and wish them much success in their future farming endeavours. I request waiver.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for the honourable leader of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure today to rise and to do an introduction. In the West Gallery, we have with us today students from Eric Graves Junior High. They're grade 7 students. They're with the leaders of this group are Cindy Smart and Sue McKenzie, who are here to observe some of the proceedings of the House, and I wonder if the House might give them a warm welcome. Thanks.
Certainly welcome our special guests to the gallery today and hope they enjoy the proceedings. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you. And if I beg the indulgence of the Speaker to do an introduction before my resolution. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, in your gallery is representatives of injured workers throughout Nova Scotia. I want to name 3 of them because they are the presidents of their respective associations, and I'll ask all of them to stand to receive a warm reception from the House. We have June Labrador, who's the president of the Mainland Injured Workers Association. We have Mary Lloyd, who's the Pictou County Injured Workers Association president, and Jimmy Lau, who's the president of the Cape Breton Injured Workers Association. The injured workers are here today to take in the proceedings, hear question period, and hopefully have a chance to talk to the Minister of Labour, I hope. So would you all stand and be recognized by the House?
Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Knights of Columbus Father Joseph E. Mills Council 10486 in Eastern Passage has a distinguished history in the community. Whereas the Knights of Columbus wanted to pay tribute to the police officers, firefighters, paramedics, Coast Guard, soldiers, sailors, and Air Force personnel who keep our world safe and secure. Whereas the Knights of Columbus Eastern Passage held a Blue Mass at Our Lady of Assumption Chapel at Canadian Forces Base Shearwater on March 14th to pay tribute to those who serve. Therefore, be it resolved that this House recognize the efforts of Knights of Columbus Father Joseph E. Mills Council number 10486 for organizing a Blue Mass for those who serve their community and country with distinction. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
For waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Annapolis Valley Campus Center of Geographic Sciences held their spring convocation on Saturday, May 1st, 2004, and whereas the Nova Scotia Community College Gold Medal is awarded to a graduating student of a college certificate program who has achieved the highest academic standing, and whereas Melissa Wood, a graduate of the Survey Technician program, was the recipient of the Nova Scotia Community College Gold Medal. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Melissa Wood and all graduates of this fine Nova Scotia institution. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Eastern Shore.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Beacon is a monthly community newspaper that serves the communities of Eastern Passage, Cow Bay, and Shearwater, and whereas for the last 8 years, editor Lynn McKay has worked with a team of volunteers to publish this fine publication. And whereas Lynn McKay recently decided to take a well-deserved break after many years of tireless effort, therefore be it resolved that this House congratulate and thank Lynn McKay for her tremendous service to the people of Eastern Passage, Cow Bay, and Shearwater as editor of the Beacon, and wish her all the best in her future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 4 vegetation management firms, Atlantic Arbor, Highland Vegetation Management, GPF Tree Services, and R. McLean Forestry, the people of Nova Scotia have been negatively impacted by Emera's decision to award a single-source vegetation management contract to a U.S.-based firm. And whereas these small firms have served Nova Scotia Power effectively for many years and have made substantial investment in equipment, training, and have employed many rural Nova Scotians. And whereas the Minister of Natural Resources has agreed to meet with the representatives of Emera and the affected firms to try and rectify this dramatic deviation in business practice. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House commend the Minister and representatives of Emera for listening to the concerns of small business and rural Nova Scotians and encourage the Minister to continue to pursue negotiations until the situation has been resolved in favour of Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the gasoline prices posted in Nova Scotia this week, 88.9 cents a litre for self-serve, are higher than the prices reported in 2003 in the first 4 months of 2004. And whereas despite a record average gasoline price in 2003, the only reassurance now offered by private sector analysts is that the price is not likely to exceed $1 a litre in the next few months. And whereas cabinet ministers and government MLAs have agreed that Nova Scotia should consider adopting some means of limiting price spikes and ensuring that fuel prices are justifiable, therefore be it resolved that this House urges early legislative action to help protect drivers, businesses, and homeowners from unjustified hikes and destabilizing spikes in the price of fuel. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Waiver, is it agreed? No. I hear a no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for the Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on February the 15th of this year, the residents of New Minas and surrounding area lost a great friend. And whereas Dan Waters was a man who spent much of his free time helping others, doing things such as helping seniors get to their doctor's appointments, serving at community breakfasts with the Lions Club, mediating disputes between neighbors, or championing the cause of those in need of assistance. And whereas Mr. Waters served as a county councillor with a dedication and compassion that is almost unparalleled, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House express our deep sorrow at the death of Dan Waters and extend to his family and friends our condolences at the loss of such a great friend. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on April 28, 2004, as part of Education Week, a heritage fair was held at Sydney Mines Junior High with competitors from grades 7, 8, and 9 demonstrating visual displays and written essays on Canadian heritage. And whereas there were over 100 entrants in the grade 7 level from Sydney Mines Junior High, and 4 out of the top 5 winners were from the French immersion program. And whereas at the grade 7 level, Kendra Campbell from Bulladry won first place, Brennan McNeil from Bulladry won second place, and Emily York from Bulladry won an honourable mention. And all 3 graduated last year from grade 6 at Bulladry Elementary School. Therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate these young people, the teaching staff at Sydney Mines Junior High, and all the winners and entrants, and also honor Valerie Patterson, the grade 6 teacher at Bulladry Elementary School, for her in-depth preparation and discipline in preparing these students for junior high. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas innovative health initiatives will enhance the lifestyles of Nova Scotia's population and reduce healthcare costs, and whereas making accurate medical information available to people to help them understand and deal with illnesses and conditions is an important step in this direction, and whereas the Rawdon Hills Health Clinic has received a grant from the East Hants Community Health Board to develop a health education library to be run out of the clinic, therefore be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the directors of the Rawdon Hills Health Centre for taking the initiative to provide low-cost self-help medical care to the residents of Rawdon Hills and surrounding area. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Sobeys Family Volunteer Award recognizes a family in Nova Scotia that has demonstrated outstanding and consistent caring for the improvement of the community around them, whereas Sharon and Stanley Gould and their children, Michelle, Ron, David, Kevin, Mark, Glenna, and Paul, are all deeply involved in all aspects of their community and have dedicated their lives to fighting kidney disease, and whereas this Amherst family has been awarded the Sobeys Family Volunteer Award for the remarkable volunteer work each and every member of this family performs in their community. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in extending our appreciation to the Gould family of Amherst and Cumberland County for their enormous contribution to their community and to fighting kidney disease, and congratulate them on receiving the Sobeys Family Volunteer Award for 2004. And I respectfully request waiver of notice.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Cops for Cancer program is a very popular one in which cops, students, and members of the community get their heads shaved to receive bids for a wonderful cause. And whereas fundraising events like these also promote awareness and encourage students to become active in their communities. And whereas Dalbury Academy's School Students Helping Our World Committee, RCMP officers from the Inverness Detachment, as well as several community members participated in this worthwhile event last month, which raised $2,846.67. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House acknowledge the tremendous work of the volunteers who took part in this event and congratulate them on their success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou West.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas fish harvesters in the Gulf area have recently voted for professionalization, and whereas there are 663 core harvesters or captains of the fishing boats and an additional 1,683 registered crew members and casual workers employed in the Gulf region, and whereas this designation will allow for more professional development and training and help create in the public a stronger image of fish harvesters, therefore be it resolved that this legislature congratulate the fish harvesters in the Gulf Nova Scotia area for the certification of the professional designation and wish them continued success in the future. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
On a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Motormark Mariners have continued to delight fans, young and old, during their second season in Yarmouth, and whereas the popular team succeeded in winning their division, the Bent Division, this season, and whereas the Mariners made a valiant effort at the 2003-2004 Maritime Junior Hockey League Championship in a hard-fought game before a packed house at the Mariners Centre against eventual champions, the Campbellton Tigers, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House join me in congratulating the Motormark Mariners on another great season and wish them most success on the upcoming season. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Le Béangeois, a dance group from Clare, recently participated
in the British Association of Teachers of Dancing Festival of Dance, April 30th to May 2nd, 2004. And whereas Les Béangeois placed first in their category, which included other dancing groups from Atlantic Canada and had the highest mark for step dancing, and whereas Les Béangeois placed first amongst Nova Scotia dancing groups that competed in the category of Nova Scotia traditional dancers, therefore it be resolved that Les Béangeois be congratulated for winning the BATD trophy for the Festival of Dance Rose Bowl and for winning the Dance Nova Scotia trophy for traditional dance. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Heritage Credit Union has been meeting the financial needs of its members and the communities in which they operate for 65 years, and whereas Heritage Credit Union held its annual general meeting on Tuesday, April 20th, 2004, and elected several new members to continue the great work done over the years. And whereas new Board of Director members elected for 2004 include Holly Brown and the former NDP MLA for Sackville-Cobequid, John Holm, therefore be it resolved, this House congratulate John Holm and Holly Brown for their commitment to the community and to Heritage Credit Union, and extend best wishes to both as they provide guidance and direction in their roles as directors of this financial institution. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Globe and Mail columnist William Houston, in last Thursday's national edition of the Globe and Mail, reported an inaccurate statement, and whereas Houston said 2 years after propping up the phony claim by Windsor, Nova Scotia to be hockey's birthplace, Hockey Night in Canada gave Montreal its due before Game 3 of the Canadiens' Tampa Bay series, when host Ron McLean called Montreal the site of hockey's first organized game. And whereas an old saying goes, you should never write half of what you know, because it is the part that you don't know which can spell a lot of trouble. Therefore, be it resolved that all MLAs of this House applaud Mr. Houston for being correct about Montreal as the site of hockey's first organized game, but admonish him for his cheap shot against Windsor, Nova Scotia, which is truly the birthplace of hockey and where the game originally originated. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas last spring, former Minister of Finance Neil LeBlanc told his legislature, quote, "Health care in Nova Scotia is dependable and accessible. Our investment in education is providing young Nova Scotians with the solid foundation they need for success. Our budget is balanced. The time for tax relief has arrived," unquote. And whereas health care is not fully accessible, post-secondary education has become the domain of the wealthy, the jury is still out as to whether the budget is balanced, and $500 million has just been added to the debt. And whereas it has since been proven that we could not afford a tax cut and the cynical $155 checks, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the true legacy of Neil LeBlanc is one of increased debt, a failed tax scheme, higher taxes, longer waiting lists, inaccessible education, and increased political cynicism. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for this to be debated on a future day.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Sydney and Area Chamber of Commerce held their 15th Annual Excellence in Business Awards ceremony on Monday, May 3rd, 2004, and whereas the recipients of this year's awards went to Catherine and Warren Gordon of Gordon Photographic, Suzanne Anasty of the Beanbank Cafe, Eric and Kathleen Lewis of Alderdale Greens, Paul Weirham of Dynagem Technologies Incorporated, and Sean Burke of Polysteel Atlantic Limited / East Coast Rope Limited. And whereas Jim Keogh of John L. Construction was the winner of the Business Person of the Year Award. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this Legislative Assembly recognize and congratulate Catherine and Warren Gordon, Susan Anasty, Eric and Kathleen Lewis, Paul Weirham and Sean Burke, and Jim Kehoe for their outstanding business contributions and congratulate them on their well-deserved awards. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Floyd Gates of Truro was presented with the 2003 Business Achievement Award at the Truro and District Chamber of Commerce 114th Annual Dinner. And whereas Floyd Gates, who embodies the term entrepreneurial, has had diverse business interests ranging from interior decorating and flooring to automotive detailing to wireless communication, computers, and web-based applications. Whereas Floyd Gates also embodies the term community service through active involvement in organizations such as the Colchester Regional Hospital Foundation, the Truro and District Chamber of Commerce, and the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame, and has given financial and logistical support to many others. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate Floyd Gates for earning the 2003 Business Achievement Award of the Truro and District Chamber of Commerce, thank him for his community leadership, and wish him every success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Education rose in this House yesterday and attributed the founding of Dalhousie University to an unnamed native of Pictou County and offered to provide proof. And whereas Dalhousie College, which later became Dalhousie University, was founded in 1818 by George Ramsay, the 9th Earl of Dalhousie, and Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia from 1816 to 1820, after which he returned to his native Scotland. And whereas the money to found Dalhousie came from the Castine Fund, taxes raised by the British in the state of Maine during the War of 1812, and not from Pictou County, therefore be it resolved that the Minister of Education take time to read The Lives of Dalhousie University, Lord Dalhousie's College by P.B. Waite, or seriously consider taking a remedial course in the history of his own province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Here are several noes. Notice is tabled. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May 2nd to the 8th is Emergency Preparedness Week, and emergency personnel throughout our province are always well-trained and ready to respond when needed. And whereas emergencies can happen at any time, and all Nova Scotians should protect themselves and their families by being prepared and ready to respond to emergency situations. And whereas this year's theme, Prepare Now, Learn How, encourages Nova Scotians to take steps like enrolling in first aid courses or having an emergency kit ready to prepare themselves in the event of an emergency. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House encourage all Nova Scotians to take the time and prepare for emergencies to reduce the risks of injuries to themselves and their families, and thank the thousands of trained emergency personnel who stand ready to respond to any emergency situation. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Audrey Facey was honoured by Premier John Hamm during National Volunteer Week as Municipality of the County of Antigonish Volunteer of the Year. And whereas Audrey Facey spends her time volunteering for the VON Volunteer Service as well as for various senior groups and her church. And whereas Audrey Facey is a representative on the Seniors Committee for the Antigonish Town and County Seniors Organization. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Audrey Facey on being named the County of Antigonish Volunteer of the Year and thank her for her dedicated service to her community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Agnes Chipback of Whitney Pier has been a long-time member of the NDP, And whereas Agnes Chipak joined the party as a young CCFer and continued her support of the party her entire life. And whereas Agnes Chipak today, May 4, 2004, is celebrating her 79th birthday, therefore be it resolved that the members of this Assembly wish Agnes a very happy birthday and wish her many more. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Question waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on April 3rd, 2004, Mike Martin of Lower Sackville placed first in the junior men's category in the Nova Scotia Bodybuilding Championship. Whereas only 1 week later, on April 10th, 2004, Mike won first place for the junior men's category for the Atlantic regions. And whereas Mike is only 20 years old and has only been competing professionally for 1 year and has already claimed 2 first-place prizes and will travel to London, Ontario on July 24th of this year to compete in the Canadian Championship and hopefully earn an invitation to the Mr. Olympia competition. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Mike Martin on his recent success and wish him the best of luck in his upcoming competition in Ontario and in bringing the national championship to Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each year an international award is given for the best, or maybe that should be worst, example of bureaucratic speech used by a public official. Whereas last year's winner was Tory favorite United States Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, also known as Rummy, for his twisted attempt to explain those things known and not known and how you know what you know. And whereas yesterday the member from Bedford, the Minister of Finance, did adherents of bureaucraties proud with his explanation that some of the government restructuring fund might go to, quote, business process re-engineering, unquote. Therefore, be it resolved that this House agreed to nominate the member from Bedford, the Minister of Finance, for the International Bureaucraties Award so he can proudly take his place beside the U.S. Defense Secretary. I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Waiver, is it agreed? Here no. Notice the table. Order, please. Orders of the day, all questions put by members. Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Before we begin, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to make kind of an awkward introduction because the persons are not actually here. I drew to your attention in your gallery just a short time ago the members from the students from Eric Graves Junior High. They are one half of the class that's actually visiting. The other half of the class will be joining us through question period, so I won't have a chance to introduce them, and I wanted to draw them to your attention, Mr. Speaker. They're here with their teachers, Ms. Weinberg and Ms. Sterling. They're also one member of that class is my son, and I know that those teachers are among the most patient in the world because they display the same patience, Mr. Speaker, that you often extend to me. So you understand the problem. So I would just like to note that they will be joining us over the course of a question period. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Orders of the day, or questions put by members. Question period begin at 12:52 and end at 1:52. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, on October 3rd, 2003, the Supreme Court of Canada found that Section 10B of the Workers' Compensation Act was unconstitutional. And they said that workers with chronic pain must have the same access to workers' compensation as other injured workers. At that time, the court gave the Nova Scotia government a 6-month window to comply with the court's ruling. Yesterday, 7 months after the Supreme Court decision, the Minister of Labour announced that he will establish regulations to reflect the approach recommended by the Workers' Compensation Board. The Minister said he thought this was a fair approach. But, Mr. Speaker, neither injured workers, nor Labour, nor employer groups agree. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Minister, isn't he concerned that we are well past the date that the Supreme Court gave for complying with the decision on chronic pain? And isn't he concerned that the WCB recommendations apparently don't address the concerns of the very people who took this issue to court in the first place.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's worthwhile to point out that there has been a great deal of work that's been done since that Supreme Court decision. We've had people in all areas working very diligently to try and meet the deadline. There have been resources added. There has been a lot of additional work that's taken place to make sure that we would be in compliance with that Supreme Court order.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There has been a lot of work done. Last December, the Workers' Compensation Board announced that it was going to begin holding consultations with stakeholders on a new approach on chronic pain. Hundreds of hours were spent in meetings, submissions came into the Workers' Compensation Board, and yet the board has refused to listen to the stakeholders. In the end, the board recommended the option they wanted all along. They've called it a consensus. We know from the reaction to the government's announcement yesterday that the approach is far from a consensus position of stakeholders, but the minister seems to be saying that if everyone is equally unhappy, then the government must have achieved the right balance. Well, Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is this: why did he allow the Workers' Compensation Board to set up these sham consultations and string this process along for 7 months, when all along it was the board's line they intended to accept over the objections of injured workers, labor, and employers in this province?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, this process was a good process. We had a lot of people give input. We listened to the people who gave input, and as we worked through the decision-making process to come up with the statement that was made yesterday.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe the minister missed it, but yesterday injured workers said they were disgusted by the announcement of the new regulations. Business said that while they pay the second highest premiums, the workers get the second lowest benefits, and that's wrong. No one, other than the Workers' Compensation Board, is happy. The regulations will be done by cabinet, behind closed doors, on the basis of more bad advice from the board. There is nothing in that process that will restore any degree of trust in the board or in the government's handling of workers' compensation issues. So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister is this: will he admit today that the Workers' Compensation Board gave him bad advice and the approach he's taken is wrong, and commit to an open process that truly recognizes and incorporates input from stakeholders?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we announced a fair system using the AMA 5th Guide, and our goal was to ensure that people with chronic pain were treated in a way that was comparable to any other compensable injury, and that's what we intend to do. Yesterday as well, Mr. Speaker, we committed to adding 2 more board members to the Workers' Compensation Board, one from the injured workers group and one from the industry group, to ensure in the short term we had more stakeholder interest and input into that process. And as well in the longer term, Mr. Speaker, we committed to having a subcommittee take a look at governance and report back to me on October the 1st.
The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is also to the Minister responsible for the Workers' Compensation Board. Yesterday, the Minister announced that the government would be passing regulations to respond to the Supreme Court decision on chronic pain, but no actual regulations were presented. This decision by government to hide behind the walls of cabinet is disgraceful. My question to the Minister is, what assurance can you give that this plan will address the chronic pain issues and will ensure injured workers are treated fairly and employers are not overburdened with unreasonable premiums?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, our goal is to ensure that employers and employees are treated fairly in this system, and that's what we intend to do. We've been working with other groups. We've been working with other parties to look at draft regulations that will meet this need.
The honourable member for Preston on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, not surprisingly, there's not much comfort in either the injured workers and employers in that answer. Mr. Speaker, the minister has been quoted in the press on more than one occasion as saying the rates charged to employers will not immediately be affected. Given the power to set rates is with the Workers' Compensation Board, not government, what guarantee can the minister give that rates charged to the employers will not be affected, or is this simply politically posturing?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, this is a process that we're going through, and we admitted yesterday that our numbers aren't completely firm. We have some soft numbers. We've had the best people take a look at this situation, try and give us the best advice they can, but we can't guarantee the numbers at this point in time, and the Workers' Compensation Board appreciates that and have told me that they will need experience under their belt before they can look at any type of rate changes.
Now, member for Preston on your final supplementary.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, there are many unanswered questions in this proposed solution. Injured workers have not been assured that this will be a fair and equitable settlement for them, that injured workers will be treated with respect. So my final question to the minister is, what assurance can he give that his proposed solution will ensure us we will not be back in this House next spring dealing with the same basic fairness and issues for injured workers, and will the minister commit today to completing Bill 20 in this setting of the legislature?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly committed to ensure that this system moves forward in a fair and equitable manner. This is something there has been a great deal of work involved in. There's been a lot of input. Certainly the consultation process, we have listened to people. It's important to get people involved. We're looking at having additional people on the board so that we can have those stakeholder interests move forward. And with regards to the bill, Mr. Speaker, it is in the legislative process, and I have no reason to believe that it won't proceed. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, we're moving from one set of forgotten workers to another. People in Centerlea are feeling ignored by this government, Mr. Speaker, and it's little wonder. For 43 years, an elastics plant has operated in that community, providing jobs and support for many families. But the last 100 people working at Britex plant have been laid off, and the assets are being sold off by the liquidator retained by NSBI. Not only did these employees get laid off with only 1 week's notice, Mr. Speaker, but the government refuses to abide by its own laws that would give the employees 8 weeks' notice or pay in lieu. My question is this, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister explain to this House how he can turn his back on this community?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it is extremely unfortunate the situation at Britex. It's a company that's operated for many years, and certainly the textile market with various changes in the international market has been very tough over the last number of years. Creditors have been patient, but certainly there are large amount of dollars owed in arrear, and NSBI, Crown Corporation, did put Britex into receivership. They've gone through an exhaustive search through a receiver to see if it was possible to find a new owner. Unfortunately, that situation has not occurred, and currently the receiver is going through the process of liquidation and dealing with the employees in the fairest manner possible.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure how this could be dealing with the employees in the fairest manner possible. The payroll for these 100 employees is significant, Mr. Speaker. Over 5 years, there would be $10 million in wages, much of which would have been reinvested in the local community. Right. Instead of fighting for the rights of these people, many of whom have worked at that plant for 15 or 20 years, the government is shrugging its shoulders. The Labor Department has told them that there is nothing they can do, just the same as they did with the employees at the Irving shipyard. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Labor, why is your department not prepared to offer these people even the most basic labor standards protection?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I just received a note. I was wondering if you'd repeat the question.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, would you repeat the question, please?
Make the big bucks.
I'll do the last part of the preamble too. Not only did these employees get laid off with only 1 week's notice, Mr. Speaker, but the government refuses to abide by its own laws that would give the employees 8 weeks' notice or pay in lieu. My question for the minister is: will he explain to this House? Why is the department not prepared to offer these people even the most basic labor standards protection?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much for repeating the question. I appreciate that. Certainly, Mr. Speaker, we will do everything within the law to ensure that these employers are taken care of. We will work with them, and certainly we will work with any particular individual who has an issue to ensure that they're treated fairly under the law.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the minister should read the comments from his own department. They have decided that they are going to do nothing for these employees. My question for the minister is, when calculating the risk that this government is willing to take to save these jobs, one thing the government needs to do is assess the cost of doing nothing. And I think it's fair to say that people in Centrelea feel this government is doing nothing for them. My question is, why is it that this government is busy analyzing job statistics instead of taking action to save jobs in rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly, as the honourable member knows, this government is extremely concerned about jobs and job creation in Nova Scotia, and that's the principal cornerstone of how 2 successive balanced budgets has been delivered, and a third one will be delivered. The situation, certainly in regard to Britex, every effort has been exhausted to find a replacement for the ownership at Britex. The issue involving public dollars that have been extended or loaned to the company is certainly one that has to be considered and taxpayers protected. We have dealt with, through the liquidator and NSBI, a number of interested companies, and we continue to negotiate with any interested group if they do show up, but time is running short, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Cape Breton South. Order, please. Order, please. Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, today my question is to the Minister of the Office of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, it is becoming more apparent every day that this government is neglecting the economy of rural Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, many examples of this are in evidence throughout Nova Scotia. Trenton Works Forge is one of the largest forging facilities in North America and the largest open die forging press in Canada. It employs 42 people, Mr. Speaker, currently, but not for long unless Greenbrier keeps it open or unless they find a buyer who will run it as a going concern. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister: has his office or NSBI discussed the future of this facility and whether it can still provide employment in Trenton?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member does point out a critical situation at Greenbrier. That foundry or forge has been there for many years, and certainly the company has endeavoured to keep it operating. Currently, they made an announcement on the weekend that they were looking at closing the foundry. We have had contact with the company to initiate discussions if there are ways that we can be helpful in a possible sale or retention of operation, and those discussions will continue as we ascertain more facts from this private company.
Member Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once again, rural Nova Scotia seems to be taking a hit. Mr. Speaker, Britex is in the process of liquidation, rural roads are falling apart, and businesses cannot find access to capital in rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, losing this forge will hurt Nova Scotia's ability to compete for large-scale projects. My question, my first supplementary to the Minister is, what is this Minister doing to ensure that the Nova Scotia economy is on a sound footing with adequate industrial infrastructure in rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much. And I think the honourable member highlights the integrated economic effort that this government has put forward over the last 3 years. When we look at key infrastructure such as roads, we've had over a doubling of the capital budget to ensure that rural communities have those links that are absolutely key for transportation of goods and services throughout Nova Scotia. We've seen the new credit union loan program that provides loans to businesses throughout Nova Scotia and primarily rural Nova Scotia to ensure access to capital. And we work when contacted with any existing company in Nova Scotia that are experiencing financial difficulties or would look at options for expansion. Thank you very much, Speaker.
Member Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, people in Pictou County are concerned, people in Nova Scotia are concerned about what's happening in rural Nova Scotia in regards to business. And the Trenton Works is no exception here. It's problematic for the economy of rural Nova Scotia when something like this happens. The Trenton Works Forge has been in operation, Mr. Speaker, for 130 years. It's an important economic driver in Pictou County and for all Nova Scotia. My final supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, will this Minister commit to helping Greenbrier find a buyer who will operate the Trenton Forge as a going concern and not sell it off for parts?
Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as everyone in the House knows that Trenton Works made their announcement just several days ago. We've initiated those contacts with Trenton Works to assess the situation and see where we can provide support and help to hopefully a very positive outcome of the furnace remaining or sold as a going concern. We have to have those discussions with Greenbrier first before we can talk about solutions. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are understandably concerned with 2 cases where people with suspected CJD were treated with equipment that later was used on other patients. Thankfully, 33 people in Yarmouth can breathe a sigh of relief knowing that Health Canada has advised the Department of Health that the equipment in question tested negative for any contamination and would not have transmitted CJD even if it were present. But, Mr. Speaker, 26 people in Halifax are still waiting for answers. So I want the Minister of Health to tell Nova Scotians what province-wide protocols are in place for health facilities to avoid exposure to potentially contaminated medical equipment in similar situations.
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member and members of the House that the protocols that are in place in this province are very good protocols. Unfortunately, in the situation referenced by the honourable member, it appears that improvements are required. We are going to review that case and ensure that the protocols that exist are improved in order to ensure that any such circumstance in the future would not present a similar situation that we're under discussion now.
Member Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we require surgery in hospital, we believe that the equipment will be sterile, that we'll be protected because the necessary checks are in place to prevent exposure. Mr. Speaker, I'll table a media report from last November, the headline which reads, "Updated QE2 procedures makes woes unlikely." In this story, the head of infectious disease at the QE2 says that, and I'll quote, "We are confident as we can be that the right procedures are in place." So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister is simply this. If the right procedures are in place, why is it that 26 patients face an agonizing wait to see if they were exposed to CJD?
The Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, if we were entirely satisfied with the procedures that were in place, I would not have initiated the review, the terms of reference of which I will be making public in the very near future. And Mr. Speaker, we're going to request that there be a timely reporting with respect to the results of that review so that any breaches in protocol can be corrected as quickly as possible.
Member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, yesterday the minister downplayed a case of flesh-eating disease in this province. And in light of the very tragic case of the New Brunswick woman who has just died from this deadly disease, wouldn't the minister agree that he should have been far more forthcoming about the cases in our own province and in reassuring Nova Scotians that all the proper procedures were in place to protect patients in the facility where this has occurred?
Hear, hear.
Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, in situations such as infectious disease, I rely very heavily upon the advice of the medical officers of health in this province. And Mr. Speaker, it is based on their advice as to when we feel it is appropriate or not appropriate to bring forward information relative to diseases. Mr. Speaker, in my discussions yesterday, everything that I said relative to this disease was said with considerable concern for anybody that is affected by these diseases. However, Mr. Speaker, I also said yesterday that if we were to come forward with notification of every infectious disease that exists anywhere in the province, the volumes of our newspapers would have to double and indeed triple because they are handled on a very routine basis, on a day-to-day basis, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. This past Saturday, we heard the Chief Medical Officer of Nova Scotia report on a second suspected case of CJD in our province. And the messages that were relayed by the Chief Medical Officer were: inform individuals and reduce public anxiety. Making information public could help ease fears. Mr. Speaker, people are confused, upset, and apprehensive, yet there does not appear to be any communications coordination in that department, either internally or externally. Mr. Speaker, I note with interest Health Canada maintains a website dedicated to disease surveillance called Infectious Disease News Briefs. And while the CJD case in the Capital District has been reported, there has been absolutely nothing reported on the case in southwest Nova Scotia. So my question to the Minister is, why is there no consistency among the DHAs when it comes to reporting probable and suspected CJD cases to Health Canada?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the honourable member and members of the House is that we were in constant contact with Health Canada in all of these circumstances. Mr. Speaker, I cannot be held accountable for the decisions that Health Canada makes with respect to what they do or do not include in their website.
Member for Glace Bay, and your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I would think to the Minister and certainly to the average Joe Q citizen in this province that something is terribly wrong. In their minds, Mr. Speaker, you should have the answers, Mr. Minister. What is clear is that there is a distinct lack of communication protocols in place here. In response to the case of flesh-eating disease, which incidentally we heard about through the media, then the Minister stated, and I quote, "If you were to begin to have public announcements about every disease that is a disease of concern to the individuals who have it when they contact it, the newspapers would have to double their capacity." Mr. Speaker, what a bunch of malarkey. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the flesh-eating disease, being a communicable disease, should be a concern not only for those who have it, but those who could potentially come in contact with it. My question to the Minister then is, why has the Minister had no one in his department do anything, any PR follow-up that will inform the public, especially those in the immediate area, of the symptoms or what they should do if they begin to exhibit any of those symptoms?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, what is important in dealing with an infectious disease is that that disease be controlled and that there be no spreading of that disease. There are the protocols in place with respect to the disease referenced by the honourable member. Those protocols in this situation were followed. The patient was being treated, and Mr. Speaker, that is not a unique situation. Those situations occur from time to time in this province, and they are dealt with and treated, and they are treated appropriately.
Member for Glace Bay, and your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to remind the minister that reporting to the public does not mean that the health care system is not working. Quite the contrary, Mr. Speaker. It is when people perceive that the government is keeping things from them, that's when doubts begin to rise to the surface, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the minister is, will the minister confirm today that both internal and external communications will be on the top of his list when he announces the much-anticipated review guidelines of the public health situations that are currently unfolding in our province?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are many instances of infectious disease that come forward. I am briefed on many of them from time to time. Others are dealt with through the office of the Chief Medical Officer of Health for this province. Mr. Speaker, when there is a likelihood that there would be public interest, we are prepared to discuss those issues. As we were yesterday, the Chief Medical Officer of Health was prepared to discuss those issues. Communications is always a priority, and the protocols are extremely important, and that is why we have initiated the review. And Mr. Speaker, obviously that review is going to focus on the capacity of institutions to communicate internally and externally.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. The harmonized sales tax has been in the news a lot lately. In January, there was a flurry of articles after the Premier and Minister of Finance said they were negotiating with the other provinces to remove the HST from essentials. And today, there's more speculation from the Finance Minister about this issue. The only problem was that the other provinces denied that there was any negotiations taking place. In fact, New Brunswick's finance minister went so far as to issue a one-line press release saying, and I quote, "I want to be clear that New Brunswick is not negotiating or holding discussions with any other provinces or with the federal government about removing home heating oil, children's clothing, or any other items from the HST tax base." So my question is, will the Premier tell the House today what formal negotiations, if any, are underway about taking the HST off of essentials?
The Honourable the Premier.
Refer that to the Minister of Finance.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member made reference to newspaper articles. What I did indicate to people in estimates yesterday is that finance officials talk with other finance officials of other provinces. Essentially, the discussions of this point and lately have been regarding the tax sharing agreement and the governance of that thing, and that's what has been being discussed lately.
The Honourable Leader of Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in today's newspaper story, which the Minister of Finance just referenced, he seemed unclear about what the process is for changing the agreement. It seems almost impossible that the Department of Finance would be unclear about this process, and I will table the ministerial briefing notes obtained under Freedom of Information for January 2003. These documents clearly outline the process for changing the HST agreement. So my question for the Minister of Finance is this: will he explain to the House how his department could have been clear on the protocol for changing the formula in January 2003, but seems unclear about it today?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I I thank the honourable member for submitting those documents to us. But I could say to the honourable member what the Department of Finance's job and task is in doing in all of this is to get the best deal for Nova Scotians that we can. And that's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker.
I believe the official opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, one way the government could get the best deal for Nova Scotians, and one way they could afford to actually enter into these elusive HST negotiations, is to crack down on HST fraud. While this government stands by, other governments are taking action. We have already informed the House what the government of Quebec is doing, and today I would like to table a press release from the Ontario Ministry of Labour. They have announced a boost in enforcement to crack down on the underground economy. So my question is, will the minister explain to this House what concrete steps the government is taking to protect businesses and taxpayers by cracking down on HST fraud in this province?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I indicated last week to the honourable member when we were discussing this question, we had indicated that we view this as something that we have to work with other provinces and nationally, so we want to work with the Department of National Revenue. But also, Mr. Speaker, it's, the honourable member knows that Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations has taken opportunities to work on that, to strengthen their auditing procedures, and those are a few of the things that we're doing. Mr. Speaker, we recognize this as an issue, as do all Canadian provinces, and it's a great challenge for all governments.
The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Economic Development. Britex is in the process of liquidation. In today's Chronicle Herald, it was indicated that an unnamed Britex executive said, "The Tory government seems to be betraying its rural base by contributing to the downturn in the rural economy." My question is to the Minister, why is the Minister betraying the people of Bridgetown and the surrounding area?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member knows, myself, our office, and our government has worked openly and very hard since the situation of Britex's finances has arose. Certainly, through NSBI and the receiver, the search has been exhaustive to see if there was another operator that could come up with the financial backing and the business plan to continue to operate Britex. I've dealt certainly with the member opposite on a number of times, urging him if the employees were interested in operating the plant that they should put forward an offer. It's my understanding that the liquidator and NSBI continue to hold that option open as they move toward liquidation. But as I said earlier in question period, time is becoming very short, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, those employees came forward. Those employees came forward to the Minister of Economic Development as well to NSBI, and each time they were turned away, told that they did not have a proper plan in place. My question is, that same executive is saying it's going to cost more to liquidate Britex, Mr. Speaker, than to keep it operating. My question is, what specifically is the minister going to do to replace those jobs in the Bridgetown area?
The honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's extremely important to note that Britex is a difficult situation, given the world situation dealing with textiles. That being said, certainly rural Nova Scotia is the focus of this government and job opportunities, and I certainly noted that the member opposite was pleased and impressed when we made the announcement of 500 jobs in his area for the Convergys Contact Center. So I assume that he thought that was a proper economic work and effort on behalf of NSBI and this government to help cite those jobs in his area.
Honourable member for Annapolis on your final supplementary.
The Britex situation may be a difficult situation, Mr. Speaker, but what's difficult is when 80 families in my constituency are going home and saying to their children, they do not have a job. That is a difficult situation, Mr. Speaker. My question is, will the minister table in this House a plan that will see the replacement of those jobs lost by Britex?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I said earlier, it is a very difficult situation with Britex, and that work continues. But as I said earlier as well, there certainly are new opportunities as new companies locate in various communities across rural Nova Scotia. And I would point out to the honourable member, he seemed to be extremely pleased when we were able to locate 500 jobs with Convergys in the area a couple of months ago.
The honourable member for Halifax-Shabocto.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question I would like to direct to the minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization. Mr. Speaker, the EMO identified new risks and challenges in this year's business plan. What EMO is expecting is more forest fires, more flooding, more tidal surges, and severe winter weather thanks to climate change. EMO has also predicted that Nova Scotia will experience a flu pandemic in the next few years. The agency is also concerned over security issues. Now, last year, 1 year ago, we learned that 9 communities were not prepared to deal with a major emergency. Hurricane Juan revealed even more holes, yet the province decided not to do another municipal evaluation this year and will not report back to Nova Scotians likely until 2005. Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister responsible for the EMO is, will the minister speed up his department's evaluation to ensure municipal evaluations are reported this year?
The honourable minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the honourable member knows, Nova Scotia, according to the Senate committee last fall, has the highest rating and recommended by the Senate committee as the example or the template for Canada on response and coordination. And certainly on a whole host of fronts, and a number of the ones, if those situations unfortunately arose, we work very closely in our coordination with local municipal governments to improve their response and therefore improve the response to any disaster for the province of Nova Scotia.
Member for Halifax-Shabocto on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this happens to be Emergency Preparedness Week. The theme is Prepare Now, Learn How. Senate committee reports notwithstanding, disasters in the last year have shown Nova Scotians that we do need better plans. Yet this government has refused to allow the EMO to be reviewed by an independent body. Nova Scotia Power was subjected to an independent review and learned a great deal. But Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister responsible for the EMO is, why is he continuing to refuse to order an independent review of the EMO?
Honourable Minister responsible for Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And certainly, as the honourable member knows, the response of VMO and the coordination throughout Nova Scotia, in particular Hurricane Juan and White Juan, certainly attracted national attention, and it was positive accolades given to EMO in Nova Scotia and the dedicated employees for their quick and timely response. What we're concentrating our efforts on, though, is improving the amount of equipment, improving trained people to respond to any disaster, and certainly that's one of the reasons we're very pleased to be announcing that there will be an additional $600,000 in training and equipment to be able to respond to hazardous waste situations that would arise throughout the province of Nova Scotia. That's where we're concentrating our time and efforts, is improving EMO's response with training and equipment.
Please, the honourable member Halifax-Shabocto on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. What needs to be externally reviewed is the whole history of activities associated with the lead up to Hurricane Juan, what occurred during it and what occurred after. During that debriefing, we learned that some people were shut in without food, water, or power for days. Everyone knows that. It's a widely held opinion that if a disaster of this magnitude had occurred in colder months, there would have been great tragedy. So again, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, I wonder what will it take for his government to take this matter seriously and ensure that we actually have better plans in place by this time next year?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you very much, and certainly the learned honourable member, I'm sure, has hopefully reviewed the debrief and the summations from the response to Hurricane Juan, and will assist EMO and community organizations in reviewing any shortcomings and improving the already impressive response that EMO has provided in this province.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Minister of Health. A study recently published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society shows that 1/4 of seniors in nursing homes in Ontario are prescribed sedating drugs within 1 year of admission. It's very troubling, Mr. Speaker. The majority of those patients were on those drugs for the long term, not for the short term, for specific symptom results. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like the Minister of Health to tell us what information does his department keep on the prescription rates of antipsychotic drugs in nursing homes in this province.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I too read the article referenced by the honourable member, and I certainly share the concern which she is expressing with respect to the treatment of seniors in that fashion. It did indeed prompt me to ask the question. I am not aware of any evidence within our province with respect to situations of this, but I certainly have asked to be briefed relative to that article as it may influence or raise questions within this province, so that we can be certain that the level of or the activities taking place in our nursing homes do not reflect the circumstance described in the article referred to by the honourable member.
Member Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we all know, the research clearly indicates that there's also the use of physical restraints as well as antipsychotic drugs, and that this often does far more harm than good. Canada's use of restraints is far higher than the United States or the United Kingdom. The United States government recently enacted legislation to strictly limit the use of physical and pharmacological restraints, especially on seniors in care facilities. So I want to ask the Minister what policies are in place in this province to either prescribe or restrict the use of restraints in hospitals and in nursing homes.
Now, Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, the honourable member is discussing a situation which is always one of concern, and there is a real challenge in our nursing homes and indeed in hospitals from time to time to achieve an appropriate balance between care for the individual and care for others, and sometimes appropriate care for the individual requires treatment that is not the preferred method of treatment. However, Mr. Speaker, achieving that balance is a challenge, and it's one that is continually worked at by all involved in the delivery of health care.
Member Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Well, achieving the balance is one of having policies in place, and I haven't heard that the department has these. I'm hoping they do. Restraints must be an option of last resort, and their use must be tracked very closely, Mr. Speaker. So my final question to the Minister is this: will you commit to providing this House with information on the use of physical and pharmacological restraints in nursing homes and residential care facilities that is up to date, information that's up to date, that will reassure Nova Scotians of what the situation is in this province?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I feel quite certain that the information that we could provide would be information that Nova Scotians would deem to be appropriate for the circumstances surrounding the treatment of and care of individuals within long-term care facilities and within our hospitals. And Mr. Speaker, we have no reason to conceal any of those policies and would be more than happy to share them.
The honourable member for Digby-Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of the Department of Transport and Public Works. Mr. Speaker, I recently received a letter from Phil Corkum, Provincial Highways Planning Manager, regarding Highway Number 1 from Digby to Weymouth. He acknowledges the concerns of the users of this section of Highway Number 1 and that traffic volumes are relatively low and growing very slowly, and collision rates are good, which means, or which must mean, that there's not too many people dying yet. It seems that he is saying that highway priorities in Nova Scotia is based on how many people are hurt or killed on a certain stretch of highway. My question is, can the minister tell me why we have to wait until people start getting maimed and killed before we act to build better highways?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, there are many factors that go into setting up the parameters for prioritizing highways, Mr. Speaker. One of them is traffic volume, certainly. Another is the geometry of the road that's causing accidents. Another is the amount of industry. There are a great many factors, Mr. Speaker. Highway 1 is a priority, but however, it is not the top of the priority list at the present time. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, we have to remember that that section of the road is part of the national highway system, and as such, it is federally funded for 50% of the cost of improvement, Mr. Speaker. And until such time as we have a long-term agreement with the federal government for funding, then I'm afraid that particular stretch will not be done.
The honourable member for Digby-Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in the Department of Transport and Public Works business plan for 2004 and 2005, it is stated that a safe and effective transportation system plays a critical role in supporting the government's effort to maximize economic growth and achieve greater prosperity for the province. Can the minister tell this House why the people of Digby and Annapolis aren't part of this plan?
Now, Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, all the people of Nova Scotia, no matter where they live, share in the efforts of the Department of Transportation to maintain an adequate and safe transportation system.
The member for Digby-Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of priority, I wish to table a list of priorities submitted to the federal government by the province for this road in 2002. The Digby and Weymouth section is 18th on the list, which is pretty well at the bottom. If this section of highway is priority for government, why is it on the bottom of the list?
Now, Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member that...
Order. Order, please. The Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member if that stretch of highway is 18th on the list, Mr. Speaker, that he should be aware that there are many hundreds, Mr. Speaker, who are further down the list.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, the province seems determined to download more and more provincial expenses and responsibilities onto municipalities. The latest to land on municipal shoulders is teacher pension costs. This after last year, municipalities were asked to begin paying for teacher benefits. Mayor Peter Kelly of the Halifax Regional Municipality says that municipality was not adequately consulted on the pension issue. He says they were simply told to pay more, period. This uncertainty and the ebb and flow of budgets is leaving Nova Scotians washed high and dry. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister of Service Nova Scotia is, provincial and municipal governments have to build a good working relationship. How can you do this without adequate consultation?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Save the best for last. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a very good question. I agree with the context of the question that the municipal governments and the provincial government must develop good relationships. Having said that, I have spent a great deal of time over the past 6 months meeting with individual municipalities and with UNSM, and I believe I have a good relationship, and so does the province of Nova Scotia with municipalities.
Now, member for Halifax Atlantic on their first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, well, they have to go both ways. Ensuring affordable childcare is supposed to be a provincial responsibility. Yet last week, the Minister of Community Services has asked the municipalities to give child care centres the break that he won't by giving them a lower tax rate. My question is, when will this stop?
Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, the issue that the member brings forward is not as she points out. In fact, what we have indicated to municipalities is that it's our intention to allow municipalities greater freedom to choose whether or not they want to provide opportunities for people in their constituency who offer a private system of daycare, so they can provide opportunities for the parents of those children to have a lower tax burden. And as a government, we believe that's good for the children of Nova Scotia and it's good for municipalities.
Now, member for Halifax Atlantic on your final supplementary.
I quite agree, and it's a very constructive suggestion, but I hope it'll be mirrored at the provincial level as well. Nevertheless, there is a problem about communication between the government and municipalities. The Imperial Oil assessment issue is still not resolved. Whether or not it was due to a keying error is not yet clear. My question is, why is it taking so long to resolve this particular issue?
Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I would point out to the member opposite and to all Nova Scotians that we have worked very closely with municipalities whenever there are areas of conflict, that we will continue to strive to have a good relationship. Friday, I met with the UNSM for 2.5 hours. We had a good and frank and open discussion. It was described by many of the people there as a very positive step forward in the relationship between municipalities and the province of Nova Scotia, and I will continue to work towards that, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, my question will be for the Minister of Rural Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, there's a sorry state of affairs in rural Nova Scotia, despite this government's, at best, lackluster attempts to confuse and pacify the people of our rural communities. I will be quoting, Mr. Speaker, from a speech the Premier made on May the 12th, 2003, and I quote, "Our government has always made community consultation a cornerstone of the way we govern," end of quote. Mr. Speaker, this is news to the people of rural Nova Scotia. My question to the Minister is, where and when was the consultation when Briox and Avon Foods are closing?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I believe the honourable member...
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I believe the honourable member is aware, certainly both of these companies are private companies. One, Britex, certainly owed institutions of this province money and had been supported through the years. The second one was a private company who have made business decisions. Both of those companies, once their situation became clear, they announced it. Staff members have been dealing with those situations since they arose, and we'll continue.
Now, member for Victoria Lakes on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I again will be quoting from the speech that the Premier gave, and I quote, "We are investing $123 million in Nova Scotia Community College System so that 2,500 more students can find an education throughout Nova Scotia and build a better future close to home," end of quote. Mr. Speaker, what does this government consider close to home for the people of rural Nova Scotia? Halifax, Ontario, or Alberta? Mr. Speaker,
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, what is this government doing to support business?
Order, please. There's too much noise in the chamber. The honourable member for Victoria Lakes on the question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, what is this government doing to support businesses like Finewood Flooring of Middle River, who produce a triple grade A hardwood product, yet cannot even tender for the gymnasium floor for new school construction?
The honourable Minister of Economic Development.
I will refer that question to the Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Transportation Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, that is a good question, and one that at the present time is in the Department of Public Works, and I expect a decision on a change to the specifications sometime next week.
Now, member for Victoria Lakes on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that comes true, and I'll hold the minister to that promise. Mr. Speaker, I quote again from the Premier's speech. More Nova Scotians are working today than ever before, 5 times in the past 18 months. Yep. Yes, sir. The problem, Mr. Speaker, is that the honourable members on the opposite side of the House believe that. Yes, Mr. Speaker, records have been set by this government, dramatic job losses in rural areas. And I quote again from the Premier's speech. According to the latest census data, between 1996 and 2001, Guysborough County lost more than 10% of its population. He goes on to say that many rural regions face a similar problem. We agree with that. Communities are losing their young people, and they are not being replaced through immigration or other channels. Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary to the minister is, how can we expect our young people to take advantage of offshore economic benefits being touted by this government when companies like Maritime Drilling School cannot get recognition in their own province, and some rural areas are just beginning to receive some of the benefits of high-speed internet access? Mr. Minister, what is the government doing for rural Nova Scotia?
Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question, because in each one of his questions and his preamble, he pointed out very strongly that this government is responding to the situation they inherited from the previous crowd in 1999. Employment is up in Nova Scotia. People are working in rural communities. There's more education and training facilities. There's more highway improvements. There's more broadband internet. This province is on the move, and he just explained all the reasons why it is. We're responsible for it.
Now, member of Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Community Services. Recently, a call for proposals under the Affordable Housing Agreement went out. So I have a proposal for the Minister here. I'll table a press release from Habitat for Humanity announcing the Jimmy Carter Work Project of 2004, which will build 150 homes in 1 week, Mr. Speaker, for needy families in Mexico. So my question to the Minister, has your department had any discussions with Habitat for Humanity to consider any volunteer-led initiatives in this province?
Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not aware of the specific proposals that have come in since we put out the call for proposals, but I do know that in the past we have worked with Habitat for Humanity, and they are a good group, and we'd be pleased to receive a proposal from them.
Now, member for Sackville-Cobequid, you have about 15 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, so far our province has managed 21 units in 18 months, and under the Affordable Housing Agreement. I think we need to take examples of organizations like Habitat for Humanity and address serious numbers in this province for our public.
Here. Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. The Honourable Minister of Education on an introduction.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to draw the attention of the House to the East Gallery, where we have some...
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Education on introduction.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to draw the attention of the members of the House to the East Gallery, where we have visiting with us some people from Cobequid Education Centre in Truro, indeed 14 students in the OPP history class, visiting with us today, accompanied by teachers Peter Keaveney, Roger Crow, and Brent McPhee. And I would ask those folks all to stand, please, and receive the warm welcome of all members.
Thank you. Government business, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve in the Committee of the Whole House on Supply.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today, Mr. Speaker, and speak about the riding at Cape Breton Nova and its constituents, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was going to rise today and talk about all the good things, but Mr. Speaker, I think that there's an announcement in the air, Mr. Speaker, to do with the Sydney Tar Ponds coming up very shortly, we hope, and have some of those, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you can see today by the large crowd in the gallery today, Mr. Speaker, I've been an MLA in this province, Mr. Speaker, for all of 8 months. Mr. Speaker, I had the honor and the privilege of attending 6 of those monthly meetings of the Injured Workers Association in Cape Breton.
Order, please. The honourable member allow for an introduction. Thank you. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not often that a group that comes to visit with us gets introduced 3 times, but that's going to happen today. I was just mentioned earlier to the host that there was a second group from Eric Graves Junior High here today. They have now, in fact, joined us in the gallery. As I mentioned earlier, these students are coming to observe the house and some of the work we do here. So if they would stand, we give them a warm welcome.
Thank you. We certainly welcome our special guest to the gallery today, the honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, welcome the young people today to speak about what goes on here in democracy, Mr. Speaker. And the announcement yesterday, Mr. Speaker, by the Minister of Environment and Labour, I don't think was very democratic, Mr. Speaker. We talk about the Supreme Court of Canada's decision for the injured workers, Mr. Speaker, that came down, and the Supreme Court of Canada in October 2003 found Section 10B of the Nova Scotia Workers' Compensation Act not to be fair. Injured workers with chronic pain must have the same access to the workers' compensation system as other injured workers, Mr. Speaker. The many meetings that I attended at the Injured Workers Association in Cape Breton on the final Sunday of every month, I've heard many injured workers coming to the meetings, Mr. Speaker, and talking about their injuries and how they're not receiving any compensation and how hard it is for them to deal with the Board of Directors and especially the Board Chair, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know the Environment Minister said that he was very pleased that they were going to have a member of the injured workers on the Board of Directors at the Workers' Compensation Board. Not a little while back, I remember on ATV News, and I was sitting home one night listening, and it was Louis Comeau, the chairman of the Board of Directors of the Workers' Compensation Board, adamantly state that there would never be an injured worker on the Board of Directors, Mr. Speaker. Well, today, Mr. Speaker, half of that is true. To put an injured worker on that board, Mr. Speaker, and non-voting right, Mr. Speaker. I mean, when you're 18 years of age, you have the right to vote in this province, the right to vote in this country, the right to run for office, the right to do it, Mr. Speaker, many things in society. I find it deplorable now that we have 4 business, 2 labor, and 1 injured worker on this board, Mr. Speaker. But the injured worker is a non-voting member. Is that a democratic process, Mr. Speaker? I very well think not, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, also in this legislation, as a democratic society, we have the right to put things on this floor of this legislature to debate on regulations, Mr. Speaker, but on legislation, to go to law amendments and hear the opinions of many injured workers that traveled up here to tell us what the problems were that they had with the compensation board and other problems they had dealing with their injuries over the years. Many people have committed suicide and family breakups and lost homes, Mr. Speakers, and other things, Mr. Speaker, for the things that were feared the most when this process was started. And I remember attending my first meeting in Cape Breton, and it was said that the most feared thing that they had, Mr. Speaker, was that the regulations would go back to the Board of Directors. Yesterday, this announcement has happened. These regulations are going back to the Board of Directors, the place that these injured workers feared the most for this to happen, to be assessed by the same compensation doctors again. Shame. Mr. Speaker, I find that shameful. I do, Mr. Speaker. I just think that, and to use an American Medical Association 5th edition guidelines, How many members of this legislature have seen a copy of that, or how many members of the government have seen a copy of this legislation, this American AMA 5th edition guidelines, Mr. Speaker? Nobody. It's $675, Mr. Speaker, and everybody feared this at home in Cape Breton, that this was going to happen, that this guidelines was a meat chart. And that's exactly what it was, with a 3%, 6%, and 0%. These workers would be going back and getting assessed by the same doctors that they were assessed by over the years and denied what was rightfully theirs for injured workers in this province, Mr. Speaker. And it's a shame on the government to do this. I think that as a democratic government or society, Mr. Speaker, we should have the right, as an elected official, to voice our opinion on the floor of this legislature on what is wrong, what was announced yesterday, Mr. Speaker. It's a shame that these things happen. It should be legislation, Mr. Speaker, not regulations, Mr. Speaker. I just think that it's unfair what's happening, Mr. Speaker. I will go home this weekend and listen to many friends. As a former steel worker, after working 20 years in the steel plant and heavy industry, Mr. Speaker, which is very fortunate that I wasn't seriously injured. Not that I didn't see many of my fellow workers injured, and some are in the gallery here today that were injured out there, Mr. Speaker, in the steel plant, and serious injuries. But to have to fight the compensation board, Mr. Speaker, on this issue on a constant basis, I find that to be unfair and deplorable. I myself was elected as an MLA to come up here and do the best I can for the people and the constituents that I represent, Mr. Speaker. And I find that I cannot do this, Mr. Speaker, when these regulations are given to the compensation board. Mr. Speaker, years and years of denial from this board and the doctors on this board. I've heard guys coming back and denied for industrial bronchitis after spending 25 years in the coke ovens department. Anybody that's ever spent 10 days out there would probably have industrial bronchitis. But to be denied from these doctors continually, all the time, Mr. Speaker, about, another thing I found in this, Mr. Speaker, is this, that